Hello everybody! So it's almost the end of August, which means it's almost back to school season, which means a lot of you guys are going to be going back to school and, well, I guess online in a lot of cases, but you guys will be starting to interact again with your teachers through classes. And that brings up the point of teacher recommendations. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about how you can get the best possible teacher letter of recommendation and as well as your counselor letter of recommendation. All right, so the first thing with teacher recommendations that I think we should talk about is who to actually pick to write your letters of recommendation. So I'm going to keep this section relatively short because I think it's pretty straightforward. Most schools require that you have one STEM teacher and one humanities teacher. So what I would recommend is just kind of common, very out there on the internet. Just pick the teacher that you think knows you the best personally, and hopefully that you had academically as a teacher during junior year of high school. That way they know you both personally and academically in a very updated manner, so they can be in the best position to write that letter of recommendation for you that's updated and very representative of who you are as a senior in high school. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about special circumstances. So I think a lot of people are worried about their grades in classes. For example, if you always had good grades, but then you got that 1B in like AP Calculus, what should you do? I think that is actually a good opportunity for you to ask the AP Calculus teacher to write you a recommendation letter, because I think through that recommendation letter, the teacher could provide extra insights on you as a student, because who you are as a student is not defined just by your grades. It's also how you act day in and day out in the classroom, how you portray your intellectual curiosities. And I think a teacher can really bring that to light in a letter of recommendation. So if you think you have a good relationship with that teacher, even if they gave you a bad grade, I think honestly that's kind of like an opportunity for you to show that that B wasn't slacking off, it was something else. So that's something to keep in mind. View these relatively worse grades as actually an opportunity to showcase your genuine intellectual curiosities and how you perform in the classroom. And that will kind of balance out with that 1B or C or whatever that might be. Okay, now onto the next section of this video, which is providing your teacher with a brag sheet. Now, I think this is the single most important factor to getting a great teacher letter of recommendation. And this also applies to your counselor letter of recommendation. In addition to having 2 teacher letters of recs, you also need 1 counselor letter of rec. And if your school for some reason doesn't have a counselor, then you need it from like a principal or someone else. But basically you need this counselor, which is required, and then 2 teachers, which is also required. And then you can have some optionals letters depending on the school, but we're going to focus on the required letters. And if you have more questions, just drop them in the comments and I'll try my best to respond. But also feel free to respond to each other. It's a community. Going back to the point of brag sheet. A brag sheet is basically like a 1 to 2 page sheet or document full of like what you want your teacher to write in their recommendation letter. So how I approached this is I basically gave my teacher an outline of what I wanted them to write. So for example, for my chemistry teacher, I wanted him to write about my intellectual curiosity, but that is such a broad thing, right? So I had 1 bullet point that was called intellectual curiosity, and then I had sub bullet points underneath that with stories of how I portrayed intellectual curiosity in my experiences with it. It's getting hot in here. Today is very hot in California. Okay. So yeah, and then these specific stories help because I think they really bring out they make you a real person, and it portrays you in a light that helps the admissions officer actually know you as a human being rather than just a grade or test score. So I think you can play this very essential role of bringing to light these moments that happen between you and your teacher or in the classroom, and just kind of reminding them that these moments happened, because, you know, teachers have so many students and it's really easy for them to forget certain things. So just writing them down and being kind of descriptive with the story is going to be very helpful. And, you know, you don't have to write like a 2-page essay on what happened that day, but I think just like a mini paragraph, maybe like 2-3 sentences on what that moment was. So maybe 1 sentence on, I brought to the class a article that I read outside of the classroom, outside of the homework assignments that I brought into the class, and I asked you a question about this article that was related to class. So that would be like 1 sentence that's like, this is what happened. And then the next few sentences will just explain how that portrays intellectual curiosity or another value that you said. So for this example, I would say something along the lines of, this shows my intellectual curiosity because I was inclined to look into articles that's related to our class, not because I had to, just because I wanted to. And also I took the initiative to take that to you and ask the questions that I had to further my learning. So something along those lines could just really help your teacher paint you in this very human and vivid light in the essay. And I think it can just make your letter of recommendation a lot stronger. So I would say in this brag sheet, what should you have? I would say aim for 3 values that you want your teacher to write, and keep in mind that you will have control over these brag sheets for all of your recommendation letters. So perhaps you want to kind of highlight the same activities but in different values for different teachers to kind of show that you have like more than 3 values that matter to you. But you can also kind of hone in on the activities that you do. So for example, as one of your stories, you can use one of your extracurricular activities to like narrate this value that you have. But in the different letters, you can use the same activity but for a different value. So what I'm trying to say is that you can at once show that you have this broad array of values by giving different values to different teachers, but at the same time also hone in on your quote unquote spike or like activities that you care about by giving that activity or a story related to that activity to every single teacher and counselor that is going to write a letter for you. So in your brag sheets, you should have about 3 values or paragraphs of what you want your teacher to write about, and then within each of those main values or bullet points, you want to have about 1 to 2 like sub bullet points of stories that narrate or illustrate that value and just bring you to life. And hopefully those bullet points will be things that are related to your activities, related to just random academic interests that you have, or just random things that happened. And this can range from just bringing an article into class to something you did outside of school to how you helped a friend in your class or how you made the classroom come alive, whatever that might be. But just try to be specific and always show how that story relates by writing this shows that because, you know, so focus on that. And I think that is kind of the essence of the brag sheet. Of course, you can also put other things like the schools that you're planning to apply to, your overall GPA, other awards and accomplishments you've had, your main extracurriculars. I think having those in your brag sheet won't hurt at all. I think it would just help give better context. But I think what's really helpful that a lot of people don't talk about is really giving your teacher this explicit outline of what you would like them to write about. Now, of course, don't force it on them, right? Just give it to them as a suggestion. However, I think it's going to be more than likely that they will basically write that outline because it saves them a lot of time, right? They don't have to brainstorm and just like think back in the memory lanes about their interactions with you. It's right there. So it makes it a lot easier for them. So I don't think there's any reason for them to not really follow that outline that you give them. So I would say give yourself the power to control your teacher recommendations by giving your teachers an outline and saving them time and making them happy. So it's a win-win situation. I think the last point we're going to address in this video is when and how should you give it to your teacher. It's commonly suggested that you ask for your teacher letter of recommendation at the end of your junior year / the beginning of senior year. Personally, I asked for mine beginning of senior year. I think a lot of people at my school did. I think it's kind of school dependent because there's some really competitive schools where teachers just won't write letters after a certain point. And so with that, you really want to be like the first person to ask to make sure that that teacher will have the time and spot to write your letter for you. Regardless of what type of school you go to, you want to ask it in the beginning of senior year as soon as possible because your teacher also has a deadline for the recommendation and you want to be gracious of their time and try to give them as much time as possible by asking them as early as possible. So just kind of ask them almost first week of school. I think that is a good time range. And I would say ideally ask them in person. Of course, that's not really possible with COVID, but I would try to schedule a Zoom call or something like that where at least you're calling, maybe video chatting face to face, anything that is more human than writing an email. Of course, you can still do it through an email. It's not going to be a deal breaker, but I think this is also kind of my personal opinion, but I think it's kind of true across the board that people are genuinely more connected when you hear the other human's voice or you see the other human's face. So I would just try to be in as human or in person of an interaction as possible when you're making that ask. First, there are a lot of online articles about how you should go about asking. So I personally read a lot of those. I think they're going to be helpful, but generally it's going to be something along the lines of I really enjoyed your class, blah, blah, blah. I'm applying to college this year. You can give some examples and then you make your ask. Would you be willing to write a letter of recommendation for my college applications? So that's generally how it goes. And usually, hopefully, fingers crossed, your teacher will say yes. If they say no, no worries, just ask another teacher. But after they say yes, you want to say something like, great, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll send you a follow-up email with more information. And so that's when email is going to be the best way to go. In your follow-up email, you want to write something that thanks them and shows appreciation for them, taking the time to write that letter for you. And then you want to attach the document of your brag sheet as well as information about the deadlines of your schools. So you can do that in a separate document or you can put that in the body of the email. But basically you want to tell them very clearly that hey, you need to get this done by this time, just to kind of give them a heads up. So those are the 3 things you should have in your email: thank you, brag sheet, and deadlines. And then after after you send that follow-up email, make sure that you add that teacher to your common application portal and send them a request for a letter of recommendation. And so by doing that, they'll also get an email from the common application or whatever portal that you're using saying that this student has requested for your letter. This is where you can submit it. So then they'll be able to submit your letter and you'll be able to see the status of the letter from the Common App portal, but also don't be afraid to just check in with them once in a while, see how the letter's going, if they need additional info, and if they think they'll be able to meet the deadline. So I think that about covers it for the best practices for getting the best teacher letter of recommendation. Same thing holds true for counselor letter of recommendation and optional letters of recommendation. I hope you guys found this useful and insightful. Please leave any questions in the comments below and feel free to respond to one another. I know I'm kind of getting a little bit behind on responding to comments because there's so many of us now. It's crazy. But yeah, I would appreciate it if anyone who knows the answer can just respond to questions, but I will also try my best to respond to questions as soon as possible. So give this video a big thumbs up, smash that subscribe button and like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.